Michael Giacchino, you've had a very busy year as per usual, scoring the films Coco, Spider-Man, Homecoming, and War of the Planet of the Apes. I
Yeah.
want to focus on War for the time being. It was a really successful score. It was raved about by critics for its rousing and percussive and anthemic, attributes. But it also has a lot of really lighter and more melodic moments. I want to go back to the beginning of what inspired you to create this really fantastic score.
Well, I mean, it was really the storytelling that Matt sort of wove in this latest movie. I remember at the first time I saw the film, I was just so taken emotionally by it, and I walked away from it, somewhat devastated by the story that was being told. And for me, in order to write music, I have to feel something. And this was a case where Matt was giving me more than I needed to feel in order to write music. This sad story about this guy who was really an empathetic character. Caesar isn't all about empathy and all about, wanting to do what's best for everyone, trying to make people aware that they can live together, and he's constantly fighting for that better place to be. And here we were suddenly in a situation where he was pushed into a corner by the humans, and particularly Woody Harrelson's the Colonel, into a place where he no longer had access to any of the empathy, any of the sadness that he was feeling. All he had left was anger. And I thought that was a really interesting story to tell musically. What do you do when you are left with only anger? How do you get through that to find the empathy, to find the sadness, and allow yourself to heal and move on? How does a person do that? So for me, the whole idea of the music and the story was around that idea.
Yeah, and for many people who may not appreciate, a composer doesn't just kind of put together a bunch of notes just to give the background music for the film. You're really there to drive the kind of emotional aspect of the story. It's very, and of course, so many of your scores have done that over the years. But for this one in particular, you also had to fill in, obviously, for the apes who don't speak. It's a whole
Yeah.
other element that you don't generally have to deal with. You've done it before, obviously, for the previous film, but how challenging was that aspect of doing this particular score?
Well, it's always a challenge because, especially the way I work, I tend to want to take on whatever the emotions are of the film I'm working on. So if that means if it's a sad moment or a sad story or sad film, I have to feel sad. I have to kind of be there with the characters. It's a lot like acting, where you have to take on the emotions of the characters you're playing. As a composer, or specifically as a storyteller in film, you'll have to do the same thing. So I find myself digging deep into each of these guys. What are they thinking? What are they feeling? And it's, from Caesar on down. And for the ones who don't speak, you have to be there to be their voice. You're their voice for the audience. Now, you don't want the audience necessarily to be there just listening to music. You want them to take in the whole thing as one experience. That's the goal. For a lot of us who are really, into movies and to soundtracks and all that, we may watch a movie and listen to the music. But I think for the average viewer, you want them to just go sit and be able to experience this all in one take. It's a big emotional wallop between the visuals, the sound, the dialogue, the music. It all comes at you as one idea. So weaving that emotional narrative with music is very important, because you could easily sidetrack the story you're supposed to be telling. If I go one step to the left in the wrong way with the music, suddenly the audience isn't feeling what they need to feel. They're off somewhere else. So you're always kind of retargeting, making sure your musical arc, the storytelling is on target with that idea of telling the right story.
Yeah, and I think that would be a really challenging and kind of, I think the pressure is on for the composer, because we'll talk about process in a minute, but generally speaking, the composer comes in towards the end, and you could really stuff it up. Like we've all seen movies where the score is just jarring; it doesn't work. And it's obviously, when you're getting really good reviews for your scores, it's like a sigh of relief. But I'm wondering, with this one, generally you come in at the end, towards the end of the film. With this one, that wasn't the case, right? Explain the process of how you scored this one and why was it done in this way?
Well, you know, with a lot of these films, I'm working with people that are not only colleagues, people, you know, but they're also good friends. So, you know, I will be hanging out with Matt Reeves even if we weren't making movies. You know, we'll be doing so. It just so happens, like, you know, Matt's working on this film for 3 years, and so I get to go to set. I get to talk to him about how's it going, what's happening in the production. You know, I'm there the whole way, and we don't necessarily talk music, so to speak, but we're always talking about the film itself and the story and the characters and how it's evolving, even to the point where he will always want me to read the script. And I'm not a big fan of reading scripts before I start to work on something, because I read a script, I envision a particular movie in my head, and then lo and behold, I go see the movie that he's making, and he has his own movie, you know, that he's made, which doesn't match up with the one that I have in my head. So I tend to not read when I can, but Matt always makes me read the scripts because he wants to talk about the story points. So in that sense, I have that film, you know, rolling around in my head for quite a while. And by the time I see the movie that Matt has assembled, I get a full picture of what the emotional challenge is for writing the score. But you know, on this film, it wasn't unlike the last one in some respects, where I actually hung out. I got to watch them film. I got to see what they're doing. You know, in between, I would go to ADR sessions. I get to see Andy Serkis. I get to see him doing his thing. And again, mostly in the context of fun, going to hang out with my friends. But at the same time, it's just all loading into my brain, and I'm constantly thinking about it. But it really is after I see the film for the first time where most of that work comes to fruition, where I then walk away and really feel like, oh, now I have this all inside me and I know what I have to do with it. And it's about exploring, okay, what do I need to pull out to make the story work?
Yeah. And with War of the Planet of the Apes, Spider-Man Homecoming, and other sequels and reboots that you've been involved in, and in doing now with The Incredibles 2, how important is it to keep some of the thematic elements of the original, but give the score a new twist and set it apart in its own right? How hard is that to do?
Well, I think it is important to do it because you always want to feel like in some way you're returning home to this franchise, to this story, to this place that we've created. So, but the question is always, how much of it do we keep, you know, and is it enough to keep just Caesar's theme from the very first film and only use it in a couple of very sparse places, and then everything else has to be new? It's really the story dictating to you what it needs, you know? And in this film, the story was dictating that it needed a lot of new material, you know? And it wasn't that we couldn't return to some of the ideas from the past, but we weren't going to be able to rely on them. That was for sure, because the trajectory of Caesar's character in this film is so different from the previous one that it really demanded a whole new approach to what was going on with the music.
Yeah. Switching gears to Coco, you've been involved in lots of Pixar films and Disney films, but this one obviously is set apart because of its Mexican influence. How challenging was it then to be as authentic as possible in that particular genre of music?
It was really challenging, but at the same time, I grew up loving the music that came out of Mexico. I grew up in New Jersey, but my dad had this insane record collection with lots of different music and lots of different styles and kinds of music. So from jazz to straight on jazz to big band to show tunes to soundtracks to everything. And within the body of that music, there was a couple of albums of Mexican music, you know, which is like the music of Mexico, which was just sort of a broad strokes, you know, introduction to what that was. But as a kid, that's what I had, and I listened to it over and over, and I loved it because it was so melodic, and it helped form images and stories in my mind. And I always just remember that. So when I got a chance to work on this film, I thought to myself, oh, I know a lot about Mexican music, you know, and the truth was I really didn't. And I was so fortunate to be able to work with a couple of experts in the field, you know, Camilo Lara and Jermaine Franco. And anytime I had questions, I was able to go to them and ask them questions, and it was like taking a master's class in Mexican music because all of us on the film wanted nothing more than to make sure whatever we did, it was 100% true to the country and to the people of Mexico. And we wanted to tell this incredibly beautiful tale of the culture. And it was really an amazingly fun, sort of uplifting and spiritual in many ways exercise for me. And I came out of it feeling so happy and proud to have been a part of it.
So, most of your award has been on the film side. All your work on things like Up and Ratatouille and The Incredibles. What do those scores mean to you professionally and personally, especially when you're being recognized by awards groups?
Well, I think, you know, The Incredibles always holds a special place because it was my first movie that was in a theater. You know, it was the first film that I actually worked on that ended up on a screen in theaters across the nation and across the world. So that one was an amazing experience of both joy and fear, because I, you know, when I was hired to do that film, I really didn't think I would survive the whole process, because I was like, I had done TV and video games up to that point, but I couldn't believe that I was actually then working for my first film with Pixar, a company that has only hired, you know, heroes of mine like Randy Newman and Thomas Newman. I mean, at that point, they were the ones who were doing it. And I loved the music that those guys wrote. So being thrown into that mix was very unnerving in the beginning. But, you know, I soon, you know, learned that it was not that different from everything else I was doing. You're thrown in, you have a group of friends that you're going to make something with. And your one concern is just like, how do we make this great? How do we do the best we can? And everyone is excited to put forth the best work they can, and just be inspired by the people you're working with. And when you're working with someone like Brad Bird, it's hard not to be inspired because he's so energetic and so into it. And that carried into Ratatouille, which then brought me to Up, working with Pete Docter. And Pete Docter was so similar. You know, he was really that lost friend that I hadn't met yet. You know, he would have been in my group of friends as a kid, making movies together. He would have been there had we grown up with each other. So most of the joy I get out of doing the work I do is working with people that I love to work with, and on projects that we're all excited to do, you know, whatever we can to and, you know, bring them out to the world and have people enjoy something fun, something touching, something meaningful, maybe learn something. And we're always looking for the same thing ourselves. So,
yeah. You talked about emotion earlier. That's, if there's one word I think to describe a lot of your work, a lot of people, what they appreciate about you know, Michael Giacchino's score, it's the emotion behind it. In particular, Up is regarded by many as one of like the highlights of your work today, particularly the track Married Life. You know, I've listened to that so many times. It elicits a very visceral emotional response from me, from fans. What was your first reaction after you composed it and listened to it and realized that you had something very, very special in that one?
Well, I think that, you know, I probably had the same reaction you had listening to it and watching the film, because the first time I saw the film, even though it was still in storyboard format, most of it, I still cried. It made me really, really emotional. And I remember thinking that, wow, Pete is telling a story that's going to, that we're all affected by as humans. You know, we are all going to experience this idea of love, friendship, and loss. You know, all of these things. We all experience that, and that's something no one escapes in life. And it really affected me in a big way. So when I wrote it, I was really just writing my reaction, my experience to that viewing. And it was an honest sort of show of how I felt watching it. So, and all my music generally is. I'm a pretty open book when it comes to. You can tell how I was feeling when you're listening to the music I was writing. You know, it's pretty apparent. It's never manufactured. You know, it's always out of a place of truth and experience. It's why I work with the people I work with and on the projects I do, because I know I'm going to be able to give you a true emotional response. If I'm ever offered a project where I feel like that's not going to happen, or I'm going to have to manufacture my emotions in order to do the job, then I don't do it. I say no, you know, because that's hard, you know, and it's very hard for me to pretend like that. I know I'd rather really feel it. So with Up, it's amazing to be out in the world, and people will come up to me and say, I got married to Up, or we celebrated our anniversary, we played Up at our anniversary party, or, you know, it goes on, and it is amazing to see what happens sometimes to art when you just toss it out to the world, and you don't expect it ever to do what it does, but sometimes it just hits in a certain way, and that one certainly did, and it's always very touching to me, and it's nice to know that people enjoy it and got something out of it.
Yeah, there's something about film and TV composers that so many people really cling on to. Like, we have our favorites and we listen to them. It's like you're like pop stars. It's a strange thing. It doesn't happen with cinematographers as much as it happens with you guys. And for us TV nerds like me, you know, I've been following your career ever since your big breakthrough in Alias, which is obviously a J.J. Abrams show. I still listen to that to this very day. And then, which is kind of, maybe that's a little sad, but I love it. You know, it's so different.
I love hearing that.
It's so different. There's nothing like it on TV at the time. I mean, in terms of the show itself and the score that you were able to produce for it. And then you got another bigger breakthrough with Lost, for which you won an Emmy. And you've worked with JJ again for Star Trek, you know, a franchise that has such an amazing classical, you know, a name behind it. And so my question is really, what your collaboration with JJ and working on those two shows a while ago, what has that really meant for your career? And do you still kind of take the lessons you learned from those shows through to your work today?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, you know, my relationship with JJ is incredibly important to me. I mean, he literally like grabbed me out of obscurity when I was working on video games, you know, at the time. And I was working on great games for Steven Spielberg. You know, he was producing these games with DreamWorks, Medal of Honor and The Lost World. And I was enjoying that process very much, but I also wanted to sort of grow and see if I can get into television, but no one would hire me there because they kept thinking, you know, oh, you're just a video game guy. You couldn't possibly do a television series, let alone a movie, you know, forget it. And they would just laugh and slam the door. And, but JJ, you know, he had one of his best friends, Jesse Alexander, is a huge video game nut, and he played all the games that I was working on, and he gave the soundtracks to JJ and said, hey, listen to these, you know, and JJ listened to them and really liked them and just contacted me out of the blue. Didn't know me from anything. I didn't know him, and said, hey, do you want to come over and talk about working on Alias with me? And I was like, sure. So we went over, we met, we instantly bonded and became friends. And you know, nothing has been the same since then. It's been a real crazy fun ride, you know, from the video games all the way up, you know, and it was the TV work and video game work, which then got my job with Brad Bird. So it's you just never know where life's going to take you. All you can do is, you know, make the choices you make, trust, you know, try to work with people who inspire you, that you trust, that you love being with. And so far that has, that sort of process, that sort of way of doing things has treated me pretty well. And I'm so happy to say I love the people I get to work with.
Yeah, that's a huge thing. It doesn't happen very often. So, you know, you're lucky. So, Michael, before we started recording, I promised you that I wouldn't keep you here for an hour because literally I could talk to you all day, so I won't do that. Congratulations on your work this year and obviously for all your success, and good luck for this award season for Coco, Spider-Man Homecoming, and especially War for the Planet of the Apes.
Oh, thank you so much. It was great talking to you.